So we're here today to talk about parenting and technology, which the parenting side, you're like, I've got that. I've got kids. The technology side is where it gets challenging very, very quickly because we live in a world that is inundated with all kinds of ways to connect and do things. And so I want to begin with just a little bit about myself so that you know who's talking to you. My name is Tom Demers, and I serve as the executive pastor here at High Street. I also work as the youth pastor at the moment, and I've been here 21 years, and what probably qualifies me to talk to you about this are two things. Number one, I have 3 kids. They are currently 26, 23, and 16. So I've walked through what you are walking through with them. Part of why I have so many stories is because I have 3 kids. Also, before I worked at High Street, I graduated from Bible college, and then I spent 7 years working in the IT industry. So I have practical experience working with hardware, software, networking, the web, all of that stuff. I know my way around a computer, even though I don't live doing that anymore. That ability is still present, and actually, Andrew, who's our IT guy, is going to help me later with just walking through some of the stuff that is practical because he knows things that I don't know, even though I manage that here at High Street. And I'm very thankful we have a full-time IT person because he does a lot. We have lots of need in that area. So tonight, we're beginning with a biblical foundation because if we don't talk about what God has to say about this, I'm just giving you information that may or may not be helpful. So a biblical foundation for how you can parent well in this area. And some of you may say, I know about this. I'm aware. I know how this works. That's good. But some of you may not. And for those of you who do, you should encourage the others. So we're going to begin with just a few verses. First of all, the wisest man who ever lived, Solomon, said in Proverbs 22:6, start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not depart from it or turn from it. Sorry, I know the King James, it's all stuck in my head. So this gives us the instruction that it's your job to train your children from beginning to end, and you must train them. And if you don't, you shouldn't be surprised at what happens in the end. And the world we live in is not your friend. We're going to talk about that a little bit more soon. Paul, skipping ahead to the New Testament, had some instruction for the people in the church in Galatia. They talked about legalism and how to follow what God's word says. And this is what Paul has to say. This is very pertinent to us as parents tonight and to the world we live in. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. So what you plant in the ground is what you get. If you plant an apple seed, you get an apple tree. If you plant sin, you sow and grow sin. And then the end is for you as parents tonight. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. There are many, 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 many verses that talk about parenting and principles, but I want you to walk away with tonight is don't give up. You will have a child who just doesn't stop. And I have, with one of mine, taken them, sat them like this, 2 hands on their face. I am more stubborn than you. I've literally said these words, I will not give up. I will love you until you get it. Some of that more than 100 times, and I'm not kidding. And here's why this challenge is so real, because this is not just the people in our world that we're dealing with. Our struggle, according to Paul at the end of Ephesians, is not against flesh and blood. It is against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And if you don't believe that, we will talk about some things that you go, how in the world did anybody think that was a good idea? Well, it's evil at work. And that is the reality of the world that we live in. So just know what you are up against. And in order for your children to know what is good and right, you must train them. If you don't train them, there are other people who are happy to train them, and they will train them in things that you have no idea. So this takes time and effort. The biggest element of this is you must pray. If you are not praying for your children, you're not winning because you can't make their heart change. Only God can do that. You can guide them, you can instruct them, you can lead them, but you cannot make their heart change. And I just want to point out, for those of you who have younger kids, this does not stop just because your children become adults. It actually continues. And then you have grandkids, and it continues even more. So pray for your children every day. Also, you should have conversations. And a conversation is talking, but it's also listening. And you should be regularly in conversation with your kids. And some kids will be easier than others when it comes to that. Some will tell you everything. They'll come in and they'll tell on themselves, they'll tell on their friends. And others, what'd you do today? I don't know. Did you go to school? Yeah. What did you do at school? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. You're like, is there anything in there? I don't know. Okay. So you must train them. I've run a half marathon and other races. And I can tell you right now, I didn't wake up one day and go, let's go run 13 miles. I started at couch to 5K. And that's actually how I started running. Some of you are like, really? Yeah, I started, walk a little, run a little. And finally I made it. And then I ran a mile, like all the way through. And then I ran 3 miles, which is about a 5K. And then one day I ran a 10K. I think I could do like a whole half marathon. I've never done a full marathon, so don't get too impressed. But 13 miles without stopping. But that did not happen all in one day. I had to train. And that is what you need to do with your children. You must train them. And that struggle to train them well is real. And here's the thing, you will struggle too, because anybody here want to confess, maybe social media is a little bit of a time waste for me too, a little doom scrolling before I go to bed, and pretty soon it's 1:30 in the morning. Why am I so tired? So your job, your goal is to equip your children. And the way you do that is through the Word of God. Paul, again, I like Paul. He says, all Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. So it's your job to train your children. And if you don't train them, like I said, the world is happy to, and it won't be good. So what are we up against? We're up against a number of challenges. And first of all, we are up against the fact that we live in a broken and fallen world, and for many people, parents are not important. Oh, you send your kid to public school? Oh, we don't tell the enemy about that. Who's the enemy? That's your mom and dad. We're not going to talk about that, which is why some of you homeschool, I'm aware. Also, there are agendas out there in different communities to sway and influence your children, and external influences are often seeking to change their mind, and they are hard at work. One of them is called the Human Rights Commission. Their declared purpose is to advance the cause of homosexuality and not just make it acceptable, but make it celebrated. So when it comes to we parent, one of the struggles of more information is more information means more fear. And anybody know who Adam Walsh is, or the name John Walsh, America's Most Wanted? Many years ago, a young man was kidnapped and killed. His dad took on the cause of making sure that kids are safe. And that's led parents, including you and me, to worry about our children almost too much. And it makes us so protective that we do weird things, like we won't let them go next door or to the next street over, but we hand them a phone that I like to call hell in your hand. And you're going to understand why I say that in a few minutes. So safetyism is a challenge. And this idea of I'm going to keep my kids safe from everything. Helicopter parenting. There's kids that have never gone out with their friends without their parents. 15, 16, 17 years old. Yeah, 17 years old, never been out with just another friend unless mom or dad was along for the ride. That just blows my mind, because at 16, I was driving around town, and we didn't have cell phones, and I got stuck in some pretty rough parts of town, and I'm still here. So safetyism is a challenge. And here's the thing, concern is good and appropriate, but you have to learn how to draw the lines. And at some point, you have to learn both to trust God and trust your kids. Now, I'm here to tell you about all of the big scary stuff, but I'm also here to tell you you need to trust God. So you need to find where that balance is. So what's the biggest danger that everybody thinks of when we talk about online technology? I know what it is, porn. Everybody goes, oh, that's the worst thing that's ever going to happen. It's bad, but it's not the only problem that's out there. And people think this is a boy issue. It's not just a boy issue anymore. It's also a girl issue. But it is not the only challenge that we have when it comes to the internet. I've actually created 4 categories to run you through very quickly. The first one is what I call exposure, the idea of growing up too fast, learning about things that you don't need to know. As an example, I have a young man that he knew about some stuff. I'm like, how do you know about that? Oh, I watched a video online. What? You've got to be kidding me. I know kids that have seen movies I will never watch. Why? Because somebody let them have access. Bullying, anxiety, depression. We'll talk about some of the sources of that later. Self-image. When you're comparing yourself to a model or you're comparing yourself to an Instagram that has been doctored so much that it is not a real person, how do you compete? You can't. Suicide is often a struggle. Time waste, addiction, a loss of social skills. I watch kids, and I see it in the youth room. I watch kids, they walk into the room, they sit down, and they're on their phone. They're not talking to anybody. There's actually a term for that. It's called phubbing, phone snubbing. And you come up and talk to them. What are you doing? I'm on my phone. I can see that. Thank you. Appreciate that. Wow, so much information there. But they also don't know how to talk to a human. They're afraid when a human wants to interact with them. If their phone, it's a phone still, ever rang, what do? Yeah. If you don't train your kids how to talk on a phone, they won't know how to talk on a phone. We have an intern program that helps them if they turn 18 and they're not ready for that. We'll help you with that. We do. We have an 18-year-old right now who he is learning how to do that. Loss of social skills, a big deal. Damaged reputation, last one. This can come in multiple ways. One is they posted or said something and it blew up. Or a friend posted or said something about them and it blew up and it's embarrassing. So, and it's hard to come back from that. The second category is physical danger. This is a reality. When I was talking about what I'm doing here with you all today, I mentioned to somebody that I would talk about parenting and technology, and they said, well, just get them a dumb phone. We'll talk about that in a bit. And I said, well, maybe not. We'll talk about why. And then this person proceeded to share how a 12-year-old relative of theirs had been asked by a stranger for pics, and she and her friend both sent them. You're like, what? You're serious? Okay. Physical safety. Giving away where you live. This happens, and then somebody comes by and visits that you're not expecting. Trafficking, online predators. Now, online predators are real, but it's a very small percentage of who's actually out there. There's a lot of other problems. Exposure to agendas. This one is vast, and I'm going to talk about just a couple of them. The biggest one that many of us would be concerned about is the LGBTQ movement, and I've mentioned already that there is a strong agenda there, specifically with the idea of trans at the moment. Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And I just want you to know, even inside of the LGBT movement, there is destruction because they are infighting about all of these things. And one of the biggest struggles is what has happened with the trans movement. If you understand your history, many years ago, gender dysphoria was a boy problem. And it was a very, 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 very small percentage of society that struggled with this. Well, this woman, whose name is Abigail Schreier, wrote a book called Irreversible Damage. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. But in this book, she talks about how there has become a movement online to affect and infect girls who are struggling. So you're 12, you have anxiety, you already don't like the way you look, you go into your therapist, who your parents have brought you to, who are very progressive, and they say, hey, you're struggling. Yeah, well, maybe you're a boy. Oh, maybe that's going to solve my problem. And then they walk you down a road of destruction, and it's horrible. It's devastating. And even people who have made a transition themselves as adults look and say, this is destroying children. This is not right. This movement is destructive towards kids. Then you have radicalism, terrorism, nationalism, racism. There was recently in Allen, Texas, a shooting in a mall, and the young man who shot all of these people is Hispanic. He is of Latin origin, Mexico, I'm not sure what, it doesn't really matter, but he has brown skin, but his online persona was a white nationalist, and he has all of this white nationalism that he's posted. Talk about confused, but there it is. Why did he do that? Because he got sucked into a system and he began to behave in a way that was devastating and deadly, killed many people. Misinformation, lies about all kinds of things. The Holocaust isn't real. We never landed on the moon. The earth is flat. Vaccines are good. Vaccines are bad. You should never get a vaccine. You should always get all the vaccines. Who do we believe? I don't know who to believe. And then violence. Do not recommend you go searching for them, but there are things that you can see online. You should never watch them. And yet there they are. And if somebody types in the right word, you can find them. So this book that I talked about, it's data-driven. And what she warns you about is this desire to capture girls. It's not religious. She is not religious. She's actually pro-LGBT. She's very kind and affirming, but she demonstrates just how bad this movement is. Because if you're a girl and you begin puberty blockers, and then you start taking hormones, testosterone in their case, you usually become sterile. You never can have a normal life when it comes to being a full, whole human being. And I'm just here to tell you, the DNA, like every cell in your body, still has XX chromosomes. That's just the way it is. You're never going to get around that. And the bone structure. You have bones, you have man or woman bones. That's just the way it is. You can read all about that in her book. It's eye-opening. The last section we'll talk about is online scams. Catfishing. If you don't know what this is somebody pretending to be somebody else, somebody they're not. A 52-year-old man who says, I'm a 14-year-old girl. Or a 14-year-old boy who says, I'm a 49-year-old woman. And either way, they're trying to scam you for some reason. And it doesn't matter what the reason is, it happens. That's a little bit of a different thing from what's called spoofing. Spoofing is, and this has happened to me, somebody will call you and you're like, oh, this is my friend. And you answer the phone and it's a robocaller. You're like, how did that happen? They're spoofing. They're using somebody else's number for their purposes. It's not hard to do if you have the right software. And it happens en masse all day long. Your kids aren't going to know how to deal with that. AI, I just read the other day, if they can capture 3 seconds of your voice online, they can use that data to make a phone call to you as a parent from your child and say, I'm in trouble, please send money. And when it comes to video, if there's just a few minutes of video or enough pictures of you, not very many, they can do the same thing with FaceTime. They've done it more than once and demonstrated it's feasible. My son-in-law and I were talking about that ship has sailed for both of us. There's literally hundreds of hours of video for us online. We're never going to get rid of all of it. Some other people in the room, I'm looking at a few of you, you're done. That ain't happening. So you need to figure out how to manage that, practically speaking. Identity theft, if you're not careful about where your information is, you're going to struggle with that. If one of the companies you do business with is hacked, you'll be in trouble. Phishing means somebody sends you an email, you click the link, it opens up something you don't want. And if you're subscribing to the wrong kind of stuff, it will be filled with that. Or if you open up a message from the wrong person, you may think you're going to your bank, but you're not. You're going to their site. They can also bring malware and ransomware. You've heard about ransomware. They'll encrypt your hard drive. Your data's gone. You may not care, but where you work may care, and it will affect you. And then zero-day attacks. If somebody sends the right kind of a message to your phone, it'll do two things. It'll reboot, and they'll have full access to everything on it. And some of you go, what? Yeah, when the iPhone says you need to update, you should. There's actually 2 of them out right now. So technology, if I haven't scared you enough, we're not done by any means, I hate to tell you. So here's my recommendation when it comes to tech and your kids. Are you ready? It's very simple. They're going to love you. Don't Don't. Now, I recognize that most of you say, but that's not reality. Okay, we'll talk about that. Before we do, let's have a little fun. We're going to talk about maturity before privilege. Most of the time you hit 21 and it's like, man, I can do whatever I want. I've turned 21. My daughter pointed this out to me. I hate that after you hit 21, you run out of new privileges to earn. I think at 25, I should be able to at least use dynamite recreationally. So you're like, yeah, me too. Now, there is actually something that you get to do at 25 that we don't think about until you're like traveling. So we don't let you have a permit to drive until you turn 15. You can't drive, at least in Missouri, until you turn 16, and there's rules about how that works. Like you can have one other person not related to you in the car, but no more than that. You don't get to vote until you're 18. Substances, tobacco, marijuana, alcohol, not allowed until 21. A rental car and a U.S. representative, they just both happen to be 25. But that is when your prefrontal cortex is fully developed. I'm not sure if all of theirs is, but that we won't go there. So rental car. The rental car companies have figured out that you're not a safe driver really until you turn 25. And if you want to do it at like 23, they go, that's cool, $30 a day extra. So when your child says, I ought to be able to, you need to look at them and say, that's interesting. You're not ready to do all these things. And I know people who say, well, they're going to. Oh, so you just give in? My 12-year-old's going to. Oh, so you're going to give them the keys to the family car and say, have a good time? I don't think that's what you'll do, most of you. Maybe one or two of you will. But here's the challenge. Some of these are relatively easy to manage, right? If we're talking about substances, I would hope that you're keeping things under lock and key. You have to register to vote. You have to pass a test to get your license, in theory. The challenge for us is that devices are everywhere. And if you don't believe me, I have a fun picture for you. So, how can you get on the internet? You can go to your stove. You can go to your refrigerator. You can go to your sound system. You can go to the cameras that you have that are connected to the internet, which not at my house. You can go to your car. Some cars have internet connectivity, and you can go surf the web. Recently, somebody got hacked through a light bulb, if I remember correctly. Yeah, that's fun. The obvious ones are smartphones, laptops, and then all of this other stuff are either connected and there are avenues through which you can go. Not showed up here, shown are smart TVs, ebook readers, things like streaming devices, game consoles, smart glasses, smart watches. These are all pathways that you can gain access to the internet. And if you're 15 and motivated, you will figure out how it works. A few seconds, a few clicks, and you're done. So let's talk about this for just a second. If you insist, if you say, we're doing it, okay, here's my recommendations if you insist. First of all, you need to have some limits. You need to have some parameters. You need to say, you're allowed to on the weekend, not during school days. You're allowed to at night, not during the school day. You're allowed half an hour. You're allowed an hour. And there's studies about how long, and half an hour is probably about the most it should be for certain things. Now, some of you say, well, I let them play games. Games are not nearly as much of a problem if they're not connected to the internet. That is the biggest challenge, is if there is an internet connection. If the device has no internet connection, it's not amazing, but it's safer. It's better. Next, after you've set some limits, you should deliberate. You should be deliberate. Both of those, and those are two different words. I'm not here to teach English, but they're two different words. You should have a purpose and a plan. You should expand as you see fit. You should have conversations about, you know what, when you turn 16, we'll allow that. This other stuff, 18. You're 18, you're old enough. You want a social media account? You can be 18. That's up to you to decide with your kids. But I'll tell you one story that I love. This mom went to, I think, an 11 or 12-year-old and said, if you will wait to have no social media until you turn 18, I'll give you $3,000 when you turn 18. Now, some of you go, well, that's a lot of money. Oh, but if you start saving it when they're 12, you've got 6 years. And I just want to tell you, as a dad who's walked through this, worth every penny you would spend. Every penny. When kids look at devices, they don't look at it and say, what is it for, right? We look at a phone and go, what is it for? For making phone calls. They look at it and say, what can I do with it? How can I use this? How can it function? We do this in things like, I have a hammer, right? Now, what is this for? This is for building a house. And it can be used to build a house or a shed, but it also can be used to bring great destruction. And if you don't believe me, I'll come visit your car in a few minutes and we'll find out just how much damage I could do with one 28-ounce framing hammer. And then let's get really deviant and talk about how death can be brought about by a tool that is intended for the building and creation of good things. What matters is who wields it and what is their purpose and intent. Hammers can be good or very bad. Let's talk about water for just a sec. We're made 70% of water. And if you don't have enough, you'll get sick. I know because I watched kids do it at camp last week. I don't feel good. I can't walk. You haven't had enough water. And so we got enough water in their body, and amazingly, they felt better. But here's the thing. For most of us, 5 or 6 liters in less than 3-hour window will kill you. It's happened. It's called hyponatremia, and it will kill you. The idea of the dose, the poison is in the dose, okay? It's how much or how little. What's this a bottle of? Tylenol. 2 takes your headache away. The whole bottle takes your life away. Right? How much? How much is enough? How much is too much? Now, these are all things that a little bit is good, a lot of it is bad. Let's talk about viruses and bacteria. I did some fun research for this little segment. There are some viruses and bacteria that if you catch them, you literally can be dead within 3 or 4 hours. Not days, not weeks, not months, hours. You go to the wrong place, you touch the wrong thing, you touch the wrong part of your body, and boom, you die a painful and quick death. And now why do I point that out? Because some of you say, well, these aren't necessarily inherently bad. No, they're not. But there are some things that one time is devastating. And I know because I sit across the table from students who tell me the first time I was exposed, I was 8 years old. And it has affected me ever since. I saw a thing online, and it still affects me. So, you should be careful. And with your kids, all these devices that are out there, it's like water. You know what happens if we take this water and we start pouring it on the stage? Besides our team, like our facilities team and our worship team freaking out, the water will eventually find its way down. It will find every crack. It will find every space that it can get into. And if I did that, it has nothing but time. And your kids are the same way. 1 o'clock in the morning, you're fast asleep. You left all the devices out and unlocked, and they're, what can I get to? How can I get there? What can I get to? How can I get there? What can I get to? How can I get there? All because one time they saw something they shouldn't. Just like water, it's dangerous. So you need to have some balance, but you also need to protect them from the deadly. There's some stuff you lock up. You have firearms in your house, you lock them up. Otherwise, one time is all it takes. And you end up in the news and in prison and with death and destruction in your life. So let's talk about, and this is in the practical side, but generally speaking, not the details. So there's a bunch of problematic apps. The first one, Spotify. Spotify is a music app. We actually have it on the computer in the back of the room. You can listen to music on it. As of 2021, they introduced podcasts. Podcasts allowed for there to be porn on Spotify. There's a reason why I don't want kids in the room, because I'm telling you some things that it's like, I don't want you to know that, but it's reality. So one of my kids had it on their phone. No more. Bye-bye, because there's no way to protect them. They have an explicit tool. You can say, don't let them listen to explicit music. It doesn't work because Spotify doesn't care about tags, and the artist picks whether or not it's counted as explicit. So the words can be really bad, and it'll still play. And as I've demonstrated with some of my students on a trip to camp, I can say something, no bad words, but it's still bad. And this is the example that I used with them. I'm going to do you in. Did I say anything that had any bad words in it? No, but I just threatened to kill someone. I'm going to do you in. And that kind of thing can be used in music all over the place. And you should not let your kids listen to that. Any music app is actually problematic. Here's a fun one. Maps app, what's it for? So I can get from point A to point B. No, not if you're a motivated child who is looking for content, because let's face it, if it has a physical location, and I don't need to tell you what kind of places have physical locations that maybe have some inappropriate content related to them, do I? You can type those words into a map tool, and it's going to show you pictures from the physical location of the stuff. And some of you are going, oh my word, I never thought about that. Yeah, me neither until I discovered it. It's fun. That little built-in search bar that makes it super easy to find stuff, that also means you can type in SEX and see what happens, or many other words, and it will show all kinds of content if you have not protected their device. Then, streaming services and devices, they are there for one reason, to get you to watch content. They don't care about protecting your kids or you, for that matter. We'll come back to that in a little while. YouTube. I don't know that I have to explain that one to you. You just kind of get it. But kids anything? YouTube Kids. YouTube Kids. Let's talk about YouTube Kids for just a second. I've already heard one story from a parent before we started this evening. I'm going to tell you a couple more. YouTube Kids. A lot of parents are like, let's plug that in and let them watch stuff for half an hour. They'll be okay. Let me tell you why you should never do that, and why when we were younger, did not allow our kids to watch anything without us watching it first. It's just reality. So here's the first one. They seem to be like safe videos. And sometimes you have a perfectly fine video. 5 minutes in, though, somebody has grabbed that video, interspersed some other content. So it's actually a valid video, which is different than the stuff we'll talk about next. But about 5 minutes in, it has things like instructions on how to kill yourself, or how to engage in sexual activity, or how to harm somebody else. Just randomly in there. Just because that's what you do when you're on YouTube Kids. Then I found a story, and I was like, whoa. An 8-year-old boy was caught by his parents in his bedroom with a friend, both of them completely naked, doing things they should not be doing. And of course, their first concern is, he's been abused. Son, how did this happen? Oh, well, I was watching YouTube, and it said to do this and this and this. Now, it wasn't content that we would describe as being so over inappropriate, but it was enough that it caused him to go down a road that it will be hard for him and his friend to recover from, because that's just reality. And then the last one, Paw Patrol. It's a great little cartoon show, right? Well, there's some people around the world who create knockoffs of it that it looks really close, but after you've watched the regular real Paw Patrol, next up in the algorithm, we got to play content forever until you're not alive anymore, we have Paw Patrol Babies Pretend to Die by Suicide by Annabelle Hypnotized. And so your kids are watching Paw Patrol, and they're like, oh, this is so fun. And then the next one they watch, somebody in the show is committing suicide, and then they come to you that night and go, I can't sleep. I have bad dreams and nightmares. Why? Because Paw Patrol guy did this thing. What? And then you go back and look at your search history, and you are a little bit devastated. And kids can be freaked out by a lot of stuff that's not appropriate. So we'll move on to one more thing inside of that. If you have a search feature in whatever tool it is, they can see what's there even if they can't play it. So it's kind of like when everybody here was younger, you couldn't watch anything bad, but if you could sneak into the back room, you could look at the front covers, and that was enough. That's still possible in the digital world. Social media. I don't think I need to argue too much for or about this with you, but I will tell you that it's not good. Now, there are people who will say, it has helped me, and maybe it has, but predominantly it's harmful to the people who spend too much time on it. A few minutes a day is probably not bad, but it's kind of like the water. Too much, and you're in trouble. And there are girls who spend 7 and 8 hours on social media. They're not getting enough sleep. I've seen kids who are a part of our church, their screen time average every day is 15, 16, 17 hours. I'm like, no wonder you can't pay attention to anything. The only thing you are paying attention to is that screen. Search engine tools are bad. Alexa. My friend in the back of the room can tell you a story about Alexa. I got a frantic call from one of our pastors. Hey, I just got a call, and it sounds like the TV show my daughter was watching, and I just left the house, and I don't know what is going on. I was like, well, do you have some sort of like a Alexa or Google Nest or whatever? Yeah. Well, maybe you should check your settings. Sure enough, somebody said the magic word. The system spooled it all up, called, and connected to his phone. Now, here's the thing. That's benign. I know people that have had kids spend thousands of dollars because they didn't have anything blocked, or people whose everything was being recorded, and it's all there for somebody to listen to. I don't have any of those in my house. How many of you love YouVersion? YouVersion, great Bible tool. We recommend it at church. You actually can track all of the notes that we have along here. It's great, okay? It is great. Let me just show you a couple of screenshots. YouVersion for us, what's it for? To read the Bible. If you're 14, you know what it's for? To find some people that you don't know to talk to around the country. Make friends. Talk about things that maybe nobody else really wants you to talk about. These are screenshots of actual kids. That's why I've blocked off their pictures and faces. You know what I'm a PK means? I'm a preacher's kid. Yeah, it's good. Some of these are real people. I found them. This one, this is who I am. This is covering phone number. Many of the profiles I've seen are full of all of my tags for all of my social media handles, so that if this is not where we want to talk, we can hop off and go somewhere else. Some of them are on websites or tools that are not for good purposes, period. I know what they're about. So you're like, I'm going to get my 14-year-old a YouVersion app. This is awesome. They're going to read the Bible, be on a plan with some other friends. And what you don't realize is they're going to start posting pictures. Hey, post a pic so we can talk. And then what they talk about might be a little bit disturbing. Last one that I have for you is library apps. I love the library. I use an app called Hoopla. There's one called Overdrive. There's one called Libby. Here's the problem with them. If you do not watch what is there, and I tested it today, you can go in and type in any number of keywords, and you're like, oh no, I didn't know that was there. And your 16-year-old son or daughter will go find that. And it has to do with any of the content we've just been talking about, and it's all available for free. So watch what your kids are doing. So we're going to talk principles now that I've scared you to death. First of all, you should talk to your kids. This requires communication. This requires you listening to them. This requires you paying attention to what they're saying and doing and how they feel and how they're behaving. And nothing should be off limits. And I know some of you are like, I'm just not very comfortable talking about that. I'm here to tell you, if you won't, someone else will. And I have had all kinds of uncomfortable conversations. I've got boys and girls in my life, my kids. And I've asked at random times, I'll just walk in the room, you're not having sex with anybody, are you? And some of you are like, you did what? Yeah. What am I doing? Putting off balance just a little bit. And you know what? Every single time, no, Dad. All right, we're good. But I'm also asking about a lot of other things to make sure that they're okay. Next, you had better set a good example. You are setting an example, but you better set a good example. And here's what I mean. Don't speed, don't smoke, don't drink, eat healthy, don't look at porn. Do all of the things that you should be doing. Read your Bible, pray, let your kids see you do that. Engage with them in doing that. Watch stuff together. Talk about subjects like relationship issues and alcohol and drugs and addictions and sex and sexuality. You know, God created sex. Some of we forgot that. Like, it's God's plan. And everything that the world does just messes with that and breaks it. And it's a problem. Talk about porn and LGBT stuff. It's not fun. It's not. But I'll tell you what I did years ago when my son was about 10. I sat him down one day. I still remember. We lived in a different house, sat on the back porch. So, do you ever hear about this sort of thing? Age appropriate, right? You ever hear that maybe it's okay for a man to marry a man? Yeah. God's word says that that's not right. Did I talk about anything that's like weird and uncomfortable? No. But am I setting the parameter? God is the one who defines this. This is not good or godly according to his word. We shouldn't think it's okay. Now, we still love the people who are in that life. We want them to come to Christ. But this is not what God sets as his expectation of holiness and goodness. Bullying, how do you treat people? The Bible is very clear. Love one another, not be mean to each other. It's simple. So, when it comes to how we behave, I'm going to skip this one. You need to remember what I said. Don't. And I know. You're like, I know, yeah, no. Okay, so if you insist, then you need to learn to set some limits. You need to be deliberate. You need to be ready to bring some discipline. And discipline is this. Some of us, when we want to lose weight, we don't have any discipline, so we're like, make my food for me. Weight Watchers, help me with the point system, right? And you do what they say. You're doing that for your kids. You don't understand how this works. I'm going to help you out. Now, at my age, nobody needs to tell me I need to go run. I wake up and I go, I want to go for a run. Why? Because I know it's good for me. I know it will help me, and it's good. But my discipline has been internalized. You are providing external discipline for your kids until they internalize it. And as a parent, if you're guiding and teaching them well, then you are helping them. And sometimes that's instruction, and sometimes that's rebuke. It's chastising them. Hey, that's not what you're supposed to do. And sometimes they won't like it. That's okay. Even this woman who's not a believer said, your kids aren't going to like everything you make them do. But if you don't ever push back, they will go to further and further extremes to combat against you. And that's how some crazy things happen. So even a non-believer gets it. This is the line. And they will test the fence. I'm here to tell you, they will test the fence. That's not very nice. My friends don't have to do that. My friends' parents let them do this. You don't live in their house. And I'm your dad, and I love you more than that. And that's just the way it is. So be deliberate and have discipline. I'm going to skip these, and this is our last slide for this session. Best practices and principles. So first of all, and we'll talk about the practical realities of software and hardware later, limit and manage physical access. If my hammer is locked up, nobody can get to my hammer. If my phone is locked up, nobody can get to my phone or their phone. So if you let your kids have phones in their room, that's a bad idea. Device use should be in common spaces, not in private areas. You should install client and router-based protection. We'll talk all about that in the next segment. You should set the example on how to behave. If you live your life like this all day long, don't be surprised when your kids do. And train them. Keep the conversation going. Don't ever let it stop. Remember, they may not remember that conversation, but they will remember the conversations. I have more than one time where with one of my kids, they say something and I go, I talked to you about that. You did? I'm like, it was at least a dozen times. And you don't remember any of them, but they got it because what they were saying was, this is the way I should live. And I'm like, okay, God, I'm going to let that be what it is. Last, this should be spirit-led. You are not trying to produce a well-behaved child. That will be the natural result if you are successful. You are trying to produce a Christ follower, one who seeks to love and follow Jesus and follow his example. And it's easy to say, this is what Jesus did. Is that the way we're supposed to live? And if you're just saying, hey, you need to behave right, you're being a bad reflection on me and the family. Who cares? As a matter of fact, that may be turned into a weapon against you because they know that's a button to push. But if you say, this is what God says. He says, this is how I'm to parent you, and this is how you are to obey me. God sets the rules. I follow the rules. You follow the rules. God blesses when we follow his rules. You'll be better than if you just try to say, this is the way you should behave because that's what I said. So, hopefully, some of these principles will help you, equip you for success as a parent. And the goal, ultimately, is that you and your kids will thrive. It's hard to live in today's world, but it's possible to thrive, and it's possible to use technology for good. As much as it's a struggle, phones like we have today also have some amazing tools on them, like the Bible app and many other Bible apps, but you have to use them well. It's just like the hammer. You got to use it the right way for the right reasons and not the wrong reasons.